had been a vegan for 26 years, but I was an obese junk food vegan. A lot of people don't like the word food addiction because, it's not an addiction because you can't die from the withdrawal. A lot of the clinicians didn't really want to hear that or believe that. We live in a world designed to make us fat, sick, and miserable. We make these hyperpalatable things combining sugar, fat, and salt. That's what we call a good chef. Vegetables and salad can't compete against, chips and cake. I think that it's a false fix. It makes it worse.
Welcome to the Brain People podcast, where four mental health experts come together to share practical tools, real conversations, and encouragement for navigating life's mental health challenges. While we're not here to replace your doctor or therapist, we are here to give you extra support and helpful strategies for your journey. So pull up a chair and join us as we take on mental illness one episode at a time.
Welcome to another episode on The Brain People. I'm so excited to have a special guest with us, Chef AJ. And a little bit about her, if you don't know, she's a longtime plant-based chef, best-selling author, and popular online personality known for your whole food, plant-based cooking. And then more recently, a different kind of angle that we'll highlight in a moment, but after overcoming obesity and food addiction yourself through a whole food plant-based lifestyle, she's now empowered millions over the past few, not just years, but decades, through her books, through her Chef AJ live show on YouTube, and specifically of how to overcome cravings, food addiction, emotional eating using practical lifestyle strategies. Now, you might ask, what is a chef doing on a mental health podcast? You might think, maybe it's talking about plant-based things, because we do talk about that on the Brain People podcast. But it's also something of her more recent transparency on your channel of talking about your cancer journey and mental health that we'll also dive into. Welcome, Chef AJ.
Thank you.
Now, I know that I shared a little bit, but would there be anything that you would like if someone's meeting you for the first time or hearing you for the first time, in your own words, to describe who you are, what you're known for?
Sure. Well, I think really what I'd like to be known for is dessert, because that's really at my heart what I was. When I was a restaurant chef, I was a pastry chef, and I worked at Sante Restaurant, and I was famous not just for my desserts being plant-based, but I didn't use sugar, oil, or salt. The sugar came from fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the fruit, primarily dates. I didn't use oil and salt, and they were still delicious. And I wrote a cookbook, a best-selling cookbook based on these desserts called Sweet Indulgence. So yeah, I'd rather not be known for having cancer or anxiety. I'd rather be known for making the best chocolate peanut butter cheesecake in the world.
I have a sweet tooth, so we should have made this episode about that and then had you bring in some desserts.
I actually did. It's over there. I did bring you some.
Okay.
Just so you know, I brought you gingerbread granola.
The perks of doing a podcast. Awesome. So we're going to take a deeper dive into your personal story, both the successes of some of the things you just mentioned, but also some of these challenges that you've had, which I think a lot of times, it's kind of like thinking about the smile behind the spotlight, right? We see the smile, we see this person, but I've really appreciated, Chef AJ, that you have been transparent in a way that gives other people permission to struggle even in the midst of success. And so we'll learn, even to some degree, from you how to rewrite the recipe of our lives, where we've had challenges.
I love that. That could be my next book, Rewriting the Recipe of Your Life.
Right?
Oh.
And both from, I think about from obesity to optimal health, right? From trauma to triumph, these different parts of your stories that have really emphasized, I think, resilience.
I love that word, resiliency. That's been my motto lately, because it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get up. And it's it's like whack-a-mole these days, but I just keep going. That is the most important thing, putting one foot in front of the other, Otherwise you just give up, and then,
So you've become widely known in the plant-based world. How did that happen? Let's start with that part of your story.
I would say, I really have to thank Dr. John McDougall, because he really gave me my start in this business, because I've been vegan since September 1st, 1977, and nobody really knew who I was. And then I'd gone to culinary school in 2003, and I started after going to culinary school, actually even before, I started teaching vegan cooking at a local cooking school in Santa Monica. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. It was called Dick and Jane Cook Vegetarian. And I wasn't a chef yet. I hadn't gone to culinary school, but I was taking all the classes there and I always wanted to be a comedian, just so everybody knows. I mean, the chef thing is just until I get a real job.
You want to make your pitch now?
Yeah, no, but that's really what I wanted to do, is to do comedy as an improvisational actor, more than stand up or just, be on a sitcom, that kind of thing. And so I never thought I was going to go to culinary school, but I loved cooking since I was a little kid. I got an Easy Bake Oven for Hanukkah when I was 7, and I loved baking more than cooking because I'm a science nerd, and I love going to science museums like the Museum of Science and Industry and the Carnegie Museum. I love science, and cooking is an art, but baking is a science. And it was just so miraculous to me that like you could just mix ingredients and then it was a light bulb. It literally was a light bulb. And then you would get a cake. And I'm like, this is just like, and then I ended up, becoming a pastry chef. So I was taking these classes in the year 2000. Well, no, wait, it had to be before 2000. Maybe it was 2000. Yes, year 2000, Dick and Jane Cook Vegetarian. And I was always a little bit of a class clown, wisecracker in the audience. And Edward, who founded this school, he said, well, why don't you come up and teach? And I'm like, sure, because I knew how to make recipes and everything. And so I started doing a class called Comedy Cooking for Health and Good Looking. And I love teaching live. Like, Zoom is great. It's what we have, but there's nothing like the in-person connection. And I loved it. I'm my best self when I'm teaching, and I had a lot of fun. And I ended up going to culinary school, not because I was trying to be a chef, but because I got a diagnosis of pre-colon cancer when I was 43 years old. And I had been a vegan for 26 years, but I was an obese junk food vegan. And so we had a strong family history of all kinds of cancers in our family. And I didn't want to have surgery at the time because they couldn't remove them during the routine colonoscopy. And so I went to a place called the Optimum Health Institute in San Diego, which is the first time I really heard of a vegan diet that didn't have sugar, oil, and salt, and flour, and gluten, and caffeine, and alcohol, and chocolate. Not that I was ever having, alcohol, but a very pristine kind of like whole food plant-based diet. And so I went there on July 6, 2003. I remember it was a Sunday. I was so addicted to sugar and caffeine. I had a Coke Slurpee in one hand, a Dr. Pepper in the other. The cab driver picked me up at the train station in San Diego because I knew that I heard if you got caught with contraband in Optimum Health, they kicked you out. And so I'm like drinking my Slurpee and my Dr. Pepper because I had a feeling it might be my last one, and it was.
Wow.
And checked into this place, and it really changed my life because it was the first time that I experienced that what you eat can have a profound effect on how you look and how you feel. Not to mention what diseases you get and what diseases you can reverse. Because I didn't know, the movie Forks Over Knives didn't come out till 2011, and nobody ever told me food is medicine, or, I didn't know Dr. Nedley then. I was an ethical vegan, still am. So I was just eating to not harm animals. And, it was really, getting off sugar and caffeine is really difficult, but it's really worth it. And, I remember how bad I felt. That's how you know it's an addiction for you, because you just feel so bad. You like headache and, not just a headache, but like a vice type headache and, diarrhea and stomach upset when you don't have your drug of choice that I had been using for 43 years every day just to get through the day. Wasn't so much a coffee drinker because I had an ulcer, but it could just as well could have been coffee. And so what happened is I went to this place and I followed that diet for about 6 months. It happened to be raw. Raw is just a little too hard for me, a person that's always cold. It's delicious raw food. I kept it up for about 2 years, but about 6 months after following that diet, I went back and had a repeat sigmoidoscopy, and all the polyps in my colon were gone. And the doctor was the same doctor, and he said, well, where did you have surgery? I go, well, I didn't have surgery. He goes, well, I have photos of all these polyps and where they were.
Because surgery is the only option.
Well, to remove it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I just changed my diet. And he goes, well, that's impossible. And there was another assisting doctor in there. I think she was from India because of her accent. She goes, I believe you. And right then I'm like, wow,
The proof is in the
Yeah,
pudding.
it's not just about how you feel, because I realize that, I'm kind of a little bit more energetic, let's just say hyper person in general. And, being amped up on sugar and caffeine all the time was probably not the best thing for me. And I remember when I came home after those 7 or 8 days at Optimum Health, my 2 dogs didn't recognize me. It's almost like something changed in my physiology. And they were just like, usually when you come home after a week, your dogs are really excited. And they were like something biochemically must have changed. I was so calm. And, so I will just say that, because I know a lot of people, I'm guessing a lot of people that listen to this podcast maybe suffer from maybe some mental health issues, maybe anxiety, which I've suffered from since, I swear, the minute my mom, pushed me out. These things are not great for anxiety, sugar and caffeine. I think that it's a false fix. It makes it worse.
So you had the experience both of how you're changing your diet improved your physical health in a dramatic way.
Yes.
And then also you noticed the mental health benefits.
Yes. And I was already vegan, so that's the thing. But I was, vegan can be French fries and, cinnamon buns and bread.
Oreos.
And, Oreos are vegan. Lots of candies, cakes, cookies, pies, and ice cream are vegan. And so, yeah, it was really a dramatic shift, because I didn't become vegan for health. I became vegan for ethical reasons. And that's kind of a fun story. It's funny when you look back in your life and you little vignettes, like you don't realize at the time how this thing that happened, which may have even been a bad thing, was a profound thing that shaped your life. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania because I'd always wanted to be a veterinarian. And I joke that instead I became a vegetarian, because the first day on the job, I was working, work study. I was on scholarship. And so I was working for a veterinarian who was doing protein lens regeneration experiments in the salamander. And so first day on the job, he hands me a tank of live salamanders and he says, I need you to cut all their heads off. And I'm like, I'm a kind of a squeamish person. Even when I get a blood test, I'm looking the other way. Somebody tried to take me fishing once. I couldn't do it. I couldn't bait the worm or the fish. So I don't like blood. And I was worried that I'd lose my scholarship. So I cut the head off one salamander and I just started vomiting. And I went to student health. And I said in that moment to God, I'm never going to harm knowingly another one of your creatures. So I became an instant ethical vegan. But there was really no internet or PCRM or, Dr. Nedley or people that told you what to eat. So I just removed the animal products from my diet, which wasn't hard for me because, frankly, growing up Orthodox Jewish, we didn't eat a lot of different types of animals. So like people eat things like crab and lobster and shrimp and bacon, like pepperoni pizza. So I didn't develop the taste for these things that people say they can never give up if they go vegan or plant-based. So that wasn't a problem. And, so what do we eat? A little bit of lamb and I never ate fish because it's like, if it looked like it, I didn't eat it. So I remember my grandmother sucking the head of the locks. It's like, I could never eat, I could eat tuna in a can because it was flaky, but when they would serve the fish with the bones, it's like, I'm not touching that. Or ribs with a bone. I could eat chili if it had beef because I couldn't, because I feel like I was born an ethical vegan without knowing it, because if it looked like an animal, I just didn't want to touch it. My mom, but, I knew that I wanted to not eat them, but, 1960 in Chicago, you'll die without animal protein. But the minute I left home, that was great because I just stopped eating it. That part wasn't hard for me. Believe me, stopping sugar and caffeine was way harder than stopping, animal products. So, yeah.
And to give a little bit of the backstory, you shared that you had a food addiction.
I think so. And I think the food addiction isn't to food, because I'm not addicted to broccoli, even though I prefer to eat it every day. I think it's to the processed food, meaning the refined foods, the sugars. Sugar and flour, I think, are the most deleterious when it comes to food addiction. I think that when you take a whole food and you refine it into small particles, it increases the propensity for some people to have an addictive process. A lot of people don't like the word food addiction because, even my beloved Dr. McDougall didn't believe in it because he said it's not an addiction because you can't die from the withdrawal. But there still can be consequences. And I think I'm one of the first people that really made this idea of food addiction known in the plant-based world. I mean, people were skirting around it for a while. Like Dr. Neil Barnard had done a wonderful video about how to magnetize a baby, where he talked about giving it sugar water. Like when a baby gets a circumcision, they give them wine or sugar, things like that. And Dr. Ellen Goldhammer at True North has always followed an SOS-free diet, sugar, oil, and salt-free. But the idea that it could be addictive for some people, a lot of the clinicians didn't really want to hear that or believe that, but I believe that to be true, at least for me, because this idea of when I got off these drugs of sugar and flour, the way that my brain just kind of like calmed down, because I wasn't craving these things anymore. And I think caffeine too, that's part of it. And the thing is they always come in a package usually. So an example would be, in nature, the only time you would see sugar and fat together would be in breast milk. There's no food that has sugar and fat and salt, sugar and salt, or sugar, fat, and salt. They come in their own way, right? We make these hyperpalatable things combining sugar, fat, and salt. That's what we call a good chef. And so, the idea when you put them together in processed food, I'm not saying all processed food is bad and that you have to not eat any of it, but if you're really susceptible or vulnerable to the effects of it, that could be why you're struggling with weight or cravings. And there are people that identify with being food addicts that are not overweight, but they're always putting something in their mouth. They're always looking for that cookie. And, so it's hard to get off the addiction, but if you can do it, I find that, your life can be a lot easier.
And what would you say to summarize that of what helped you to really overcome that addiction for you?
I think going to a place, so for example, I'm sure there are people out there that have struggled with more serious addictions like drugs and alcohol that maybe were able to do it by themselves. But by and large, when you hear a recovery story, they're usually seeing a clinician or going to rehab for a short amount of time.
It's bigger than yourself, so you need more than just yourself.
Right. I mean, some people, I feel like if you could do it on your own, you might have done it already. But by going to a place, and there's more than one place to go. I happen to go to Optimum Health Institute, and then later on to even tweak and refine my diet even further, when I learned the principles of calorie density, because I was still overweight, even getting off sugar and flour. But True North Health Center, especially for people that are vegan, when you're locked up, it's a lot easier. It's just a lot easier, right? Because you're around like-minded people.
It's a controlled setting.
Yeah, it's a controlled setting, and you just, when you have like a bunch of kids running around screaming and you're trying to work, it's really, really hard to do that. It kind of reminds me. I just rewatched one of my favorite childhood movies called Airplane, and there's this funny scenes with Lloyd Bridges, who's the guy on the ground that's waving the plane, and he's always jittery, and he's I picked a bad day to give off coffee, and then I picked a bad day to give up cigarettes. I picked a bad day to stop snorting coke. Like each time the addiction gets stronger. And it's really, if you're still doing your stressful job or in your stressful marriage or in your stressful life, I think it's harder. Maybe some people can do it, but I think going to a place where you're at complete rest and these foods are not there. The environment makes the big difference. Also, if you go to a place and get clean and then come back to the same environment, it's going to be hard. And so I'm really lucky that, I hear from people all the time, their kids and it's usually the husband and the kids that aren't on board, and they have to make these non-compliant, hyperpalatable foods, and they struggle all the time. I'm really lucky that I have a really agreeable husband that when I said, hey, this is a problem, I can't have these foods in the house, he goes, okay, I'll just eat them out of the house. And we even at one point got a lot food safe because even things that were healthy but trigger foods for me, like peanut butter, he would lock up. But now, I think that for the farther I get, it's been like 15 years now. And so I can have some of these foods in the house and not eat them. But it's really, I'm known for saying if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. And I got to tell you, it really is true, because somebody sent me a gift of this cheese, and it's perfectly vegan, and there's no oil. It's called Rebel cheese. It's like the best thing I've ever eaten, and it's really hyper palatable, really high fat, high calorie. And it's like, if it's there, I'm going to eat it. So it's just the way it is. So, keep controlling your environment, I think, is really hard, but it's hard for people because, first of all, if you're an addict, you don't want it out of your house. And second of all, if you have pushback from roommates, or if you live alone, there's no reason you can't do that. But people, I understand, they're in marriages or roommate situations. It is much harder And also the world is, Dr. Goldhammer, who is my mentor, says we live in a world designed to make us fat, sick, and miserable. And I think in a lot of ways that's true, because our ancestors had to fight for every calorie. Now, 24 hours, 7-Eleven. I mean, you can get 2,000 calories
Easy access
for like $2 through a drive-through window. So it's really a pervasive problem for people. And also it's so socially acceptable. You know, I talk to people in other countries. Like I remember I went to college late in my 30s in 1995, but I remember like you could just bring pizza and Coke in and eat it in class. Like I remember in high school, if you even were chewing gum, you would be written up. And, you know, I once had a client in France who says like, you know, we don't bring donuts to our meeting. We don't have food at our desk. And so, you know, you go to families that go to soccer games and they bring donuts and even, you know, this is the thing that always, I never understood why candy is sold at Petco, because dogs cannot eat chocolate. So it's really hard because our environment, billboards everywhere. So
the larger environment.
Yeah,
itself.
It's really hard for people but you know, one of the things, and you know, we've never discussed this, and I can actually, if you don't mind me asking you a question, because I'm learning so much from you about trauma and how that sets you up for different things in your life. And I'm wondering if having, you know, a lot of adverse childhood experiences and early childhood trauma maybe sets a brain up or a person up more to have some of these needs or addictions.
So 100%. And I was going to ask you if you saw a personal link, because we often like zoom into when you became successful and so forth. But it's like what led to that food addiction. They've done many studies, including rat studies, that when a rat is going through extreme stress and chronic stress, they're more likely to turn to the lever that gives them cocaine or whatever the addiction is. And so 100%. And it's kind of fascinating. We've talked about this of how some people don't acknowledge trauma and it's linked with physical health issues, addiction, and so forth. But it's very clear that that's often the precursor to addiction being like the behavior, the thing that we see. But internally, what's the wound, including adverse childhood experiences, that leads someone to try to cope, self-medicate through addictions across the board, including food?
Yeah. You know, I'm trying to think back like what I felt like as a young child, and I can't 100% remember, but going back to the environment, I mean, we just had a lot of junk. I mean, good junk in the house. I mean, well, not good, but, you know, like my mom, we didn't just have like one. A lot of people have a breakfast cereal, like whatever, you know, but we had all of them, you know, Count Chocula, you know, and breakfast cereal is like not healthy in my opinion. You know, oatmeal is, when maybe there's a few granolas or mueslis, but you know, the ones with the toy, you know, there's more sugar and flour, and it's basically sugar and flour. You know, the cardboard box is healthier than the thing, but we had all of them, Sugar Crisp, you know, and that's basically like eating dessert for breakfast, right? And you know, the other thing is you know, I'm Jewish, and let's face it, Jewish people are really good cooks in general. And my mom and my grandma, and you know, the Jewish food, it's so high fat, and it's so, you know, chopped liver and all, you know, the schmaltz, that's like the chicken soup would have like this layer of fat this thick, and you know, and you know, my mom would make just like amazing chocolate cakes. So there was a lot of rich, and my mom was also morbidly obese. You know, I wish she was alive now to ask her like, hey, did you have, you know, I don't know. You know, when you're little, you don't think your parents are going to die, and you don't think to ask them about, you know, it's about their lives, because you don't really necessarily even care. But yeah, it was a tumultuous childhood. And you know, do I remember consciously like turning to food? I don't think so. We had healthy food too. There were vegetables and salad, but you know, vegetables and salad can't compete against, you know, chips and cake. It's just not possible, you know?
So you're highlighting both. There's an element for some people of habit, right? How they were raised, what they ate, what they had access to, but then what might make us more vulnerable to turning to that later on, or even in childhood. I've had many clients who have told me, I remember when I went to my parents looking for comfort, I wouldn't receive it, and then I would go to the cupboards. Right. And I would feel that sense, like even internally, some people more vividly than others, but that's where their relationship with food was really determined.
You know, it's funny because and these memories are not triggering any sadness for me. They're actually making me chuckle. You just made me remember two things. So when I was little, I came way later than my other brothers and sisters. And when I was little, my mom was on a bowling league. And so, you know, she couldn't really watch me that well when she was bowling. And so what she did is she gave me a charge account to the desk so I could just go there and get candy whenever I wanted. Right. And then the other thing I remember is, I don't know much about like whether I actually really did have ADD as a child or I was just amped up on caffeine and sugar. For what reason, my mom started giving me coffee when I was 4 years old with cream and sugar. Wow. I don't know, but anyway, I was a little sugar addict, a little caffeine addict, young. But I remember my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Bell, because I was always disruptive in school, but not in a mean way, by the way, like a bully. I was very funny. And I remember teachers telling me, just go be a comedian. Like, don't even bother going. Like, I remember Mr. Anderson said, look, you're terrible at math. You're dyslexic. Just go do comedy, But I was always disruptive, but in a way that actually made the teacher and the principal laugh. So they couldn't punish me directly, but they didn't know what to do with me because I was a student, but I was a little bit of a disruption. And I remember they would bribe me with 3 Musketeers that for every 15 minutes I could be quiet, I would get a candy bar. So, this is
conditioning.
Conditioning, right. That, So anyway.
Now, we've highlighted some of your struggles with, food addiction, but you've also shared, I've heard, videos of anorexia, of compulsive exercise.
You betcha.
Cigarettes.
Yeah, that was a very short, thank God for that. And I just want to be clear that, yes, I do have lung cancer, but it's not the kind that was caused by smoking because it's just, we live in a world when you tell somebody you have lung cancer, that's the first thing they ask. They don't even say, oh, I'm sorry. Did you smoke? And yes, I did. A half a pack a day for 6 years, but the kind I have is not. And because they say that 15 years after you stop smoking, your lungs this was 1979 to 1985. Just
tendency to blame the victim.
Right. But anyway, but I've been transparent about that too. Yeah. I don't know, man. Like I wish I was going to say, I wish I met you sooner, but you're so much younger than me. You weren't even born. And there was no talk about that, the thing is I would have loved to have gotten help for my, whatever you want to call it, mental illness or whatever, anxiety. But like the motto in our family was pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's like, that was it. Just suck it up. And, you can do that, but at what cost and for how long,
So it sounds like food and changing that relationship with food was a big part of your healing journey.
Absolutely.
What were steps that you took afterwards to continue that healing?
Yeah. I'm trying to put this in a timeline because I want to go back to just one thing that I think is important, because even though I got off of like sugar, I was still eating. What was I doing? I remember when I was really taking my diet to the next level and eating really clean, it's kind of like I had to go through that detox again. And I'm trying to remember exactly what year it was. It was after Optimum Health, because I was still eating a lot of desserts. You can make vegan food very hyper palatable even without sugar, and there was always things in the back of the freezer. I remember once when I moved to a new home, I had an open house, and my veterinarian, who I was friendly with, came, and he said, I've never seen anybody with this much candy in their house. Like there were candy dishes like everywhere, because I loved the dishes. They were beautiful, but nobody ever really said to me, boy, you sure eat a lot of sugar. You eat a lot of candy. You eat a lot of, it was just never pointed out. It was pointed out to me that I was obese by doctors, but and that was the first time somebody said, yeah, I guess I really do. And so I remember when I decided to quit, I remember crying a lot, and that's when I realized there was an emotional connection, not just the physical part. And I could eat clean all day. And then like around 5 o'clock, I'm like looking for, something sweet. And I remember I have a friend who was a recovering alcoholic. And I said, is this what this is like? She goes, what time? I go, about 5. She goes, yeah, we often call that the bewitching hour, and that's when I realized that the food was also, even though there was maybe partly a physiological addiction, there was an emotional thing, because it was such a comfort for me to have it. When I didn't have it, it's like, then I actually had to feel my feelings, and I remember, it's funny because you're making me remember all these things. And it's funny because they're not making me feel sad now. whereas they might have before having, a year worth of trauma therapy. I remember this school I was telling you about earlier, Dick and Jane Cook Vegetarian, before I started teaching there, they would teach full meals, appetizer, soup, salad, entree, and dessert. And there was this one particular teacher who was macrobiotic, and the dessert he was teaching was like Jell-O. And it's like, Jell-O is not a dessert. Like, it's a wiggle, and I was like angry because, I paid my $25. And he said, you need to find sweetness in your life instead of that. And I got really mad about that. And then I thought about that because I had all that thing with all the miscarriages and fetal. And basically he was right. You get mad at people and then you realize like 20 years later, boy, that was really profound. But it was filling an emotional need, of comfort and just, like for the same reason maybe people smoke or drink or do other habits, So that was profound, like experiencing that there was a reason I was doing it, not just that I needed it physiologically.
And I appreciate that because that's part of healing is where we kind of pace ourselves through our healing. So you may have taken the first step of just changing the food for other reasons, both from, vegetarian, vegan to more plant-based and whole foods. And then only realizing later more of that emotional connection and then delving into some of those deeper roots. So it doesn't mean that people have to immediately address those deeper roots.
No.
You just started making changes.
Right.
You started to see the effects of those, including, I would say, when we get rid of certain foods that are not helpful for us, it frees up our minds. Dr. Nelly talks a lot about this. We talk about it. That allows for more emotional healing. So It's like, you could work on those deeper roots, but many times we just need to take simple steps beforehand.
I think so.
That clears our minds enough to do the deeper work.
I think that would be the way I would recommend it to people, because I think it's hard to do the emotional work and the healing while you're still in the addiction. A lot of people don't like the word addiction and they fight against it. And so I would say, whatever your favorite thing is, just stop it for 24 hours and let me know how you feel.
There you go.
Yeah.
A self-experiment.
Yeah.
Now, you also just kind of briefly highlighted there miscarriages and other trauma. So you had the childhood trauma, you had, other later really difficult grief experiences. What did you do to continue healing?
I have no idea. I mean, sometimes, because I people tell me like they can't believe how positive I am. I get sad, I cry. You've seen me cry. But the thing is I sometimes don't know how I keep going, because when I look back at my life, because I try not to make it too sad for people, but I have friends that know my whole story, and it's like, boy, I cannot believe I've gotten to this point, because it's like, one thing after another. And I guess that's why we're here, is to learn lessons and stuff. But that even if I hadn't had the childhood trauma, which I think made me just overall more sensitive, possibly, unless that's just a genetic trait and I would have been that way anyway. That was really rough, having 4 miscarriages in a very short amount of time, especially the first one, because it was. This was, we talked about it, and I've actually went to this wonderful, wonderful weekend, which I wish I had heard of 25 years ago, called Rachel's Ministry, which is specifically to help people heal from the trauma of either having an abortion or a miscarriage. And it was just wonderful kind of trauma. They were trauma therapists there, actually, all of them. But that, I didn't have the tools to get over it, because you have so many people telling you to pull your, just get over it, pull yourself up out of your bootstraps, it's not like you were in a concentration camp, it wasn't a real, let me just tell you right now, I want to write a book of what not to say. So when somebody tells you they have lung cancer, don't say, did you smoke? When somebody tells you they had a miscarriage, don't say it wasn't a real baby. I mean, people say weird,
yes,
crazy, and best to say nothing, or 2 words. I'm so sorry, but that was really, really hard, and to not have the tools, because because it wasn't, quote, a real baby, in that I didn't have the body, there wasn't a structure for me to heal, because Rachel's Ministry did that, because I was able to have a funeral.
Yeah, ambiguous grief, right?
Or disenfranchised grief.
Yes,
yeah. It's kind of like when you lose people that, if you've never had a pet, you don't know the love of a pet, especially if you've never had kids and only had pets. Love is love, regardless of the package it comes in. And it's the same thing, like, when I've lost dogs, just get over it, get another dog. you don't use, well, actually I did because, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
But, because it's very hard for me to be without a dog. But the thing is that was really, really hard because I blamed myself because I actually terminated the pregnancy based on the information that I had that how sick the child was with 4 holes in each chamber of. See, I used to not even be able to tell a story without crying, but it's basically Rachel was her name. Ironically, went to Rachel's ministry. She had 4 holes in her heart in each chamber. She had no tricuspid valve. She had Down syndrome, and the high-risk neonatologist said that we can't test for intelligence. This could be, this might be a child that has to go in an institution, but she will need immediate and several open heart surgeries. But the thing is the state of California only gave me 24 hours, and if I didn't terminate, then I don't know, because, that's the thing is it was letting go of the pain of the decision because, I couldn't get to I couldn't, and to have to make it myself, I couldn't get to it was like I had to decide right then. And it haunted me for 25 years because I walked around feeling like I killed my baby because I'm the one that signed the paper. And knowing what I know now, having had so many more miscarriages, if I probably would have left it, my feeling is she probably would have died on her own. But the thing is I made the decision because I didn't want her to suffer. But then I suffered for many years wondering if it was the right, and so I will go, this still, did I do the right thing? And I don't know, but that was really, really hard it's just one of those things. And if I had some kind of, they didn't know who to send me to because there wasn't like a group, and maybe Rachel's ministry was there, but I didn't know about it at the time.
And AJ, one of the things that, why we're bringing up some of these struggles is for people to see like someone can be successful, not just, with all the beautiful things that you've learned about food, but there's a story behind that. And I can see how when I asked you, like, you've gone through so much, like, how are you who you are today? It's the idea of post-traumatic growth, right? Where it's the trauma can lead you to food addiction, can lead you to other addictions, but also trauma can provide that resilience to be able to go through those things, cry about it, right? To be able to acknowledge there are really difficult decisions in life. I did my best. And then to continue moving forward and even finding purpose in the pain.
Yeah, I agree. And, you had said something to me once about how avoidance makes trauma worse. And I think that's really important for people to know. And when you come on my podcast, I'd really like you to talk about it because when I think about another hurdle that I overcome that I'm really proud of, and I think if I hadn't had a year of trauma therapy with you, I don't know if I could have gotten to this point, but I have been afraid of general anesthesia for 43 years. So again, it's like, there's a song for anybody that's Jewish that goes to Passover, Dayenu, meaning it would have been enough. Like if all I had was my childhood trauma, it would have been enough. If all I had was all the miscarriages, it would have been enough. But no, there's more people. So, but see, that's the thing. It also made me funny, I think, because I think about that movie, My Beautiful Life with Roberto Benigni, where if he could make the Holocaust fun for his son, I want to try to make my life as fun as I can for me and for other people that because I don't want to walk around, even if I feel sad and depressed, I don't want to be that person. But anyway, so when I was little, I had a crazy father, like literally, like mentally schizophrenic, paranoid, kicked in the head by a horse. Probably wasn't his fault, but I don't really know the whole story of why he was able to find the one dentist in Chicago that drilled our teeth without Novocaine as young children. So from the age of probably the first time I was at the dentist was 5 to 11. And I had, remember, all I'm eating is candy. So when all you're eating is candy, you're getting a lot of cavities. Having to have my teeth drilled without Novocaine repeatedly made me basically afraid of medical stuff, doctors, everything pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And
of course.
So, yeah. And so just a phobic patient in general. And so I was lucky enough when my father, thank God, left, and I was raised by an aunt, and I got a pedodontist, And I stayed with him till almost 40, until he finally kicked me out and said, look, you're married now. You got, so that's how scared I was of the dentist. So then I didn't go for years, and that was a bad mistake. And I needed nitrous oxide just to get my teeth cleaned, just for teeth cleaning. So that's how scared I was of the dentist. So then another little trauma happened when I was a teenager. I was having a surgery that was a same-day surgery, but it required general anesthesia. And what was said to me was that I was allergic to the anesthesia, but they don't have the medical records from 43 years ago. All I remember is waking up finally I stopped breathing. And I remember being bagged, not ventilated, but ventilated, not intubated yet, but they were coming with the ventilator in the machine. I remember seeing my I was a respiratory therapist, and there was Harvey, and they got the ambu bag, and they're trying to get me to breathe. And finally I did, because I did not want to be on a ventilator. I took care of people with ventilators, and I know how terrible that is. But I ended up in the hospital for about 6 weeks with uncontrolled asthma, and that just freaked me out. And so my whole life, I lived being afraid of anesthesia. And I never even realized until I faced the fear, which was just a month ago, that my fear of driving, because it's like you get one fear and then it just kind of like goes to everything, right? And you don't even know why. I mean, it makes sense to me, like if you have something in the medical, you would be afraid of medical. I never understood my fear of driving. I know I didn't like it. I know it took me a while to pass my driver's test, but I tried cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy with a famous OCD therapist, and she'd have me drive in the rain and drive in the dark. And every time I would get in the car, I would think, I'm going to kill somebody, And it was really funny, because when I faced my fear of general anesthesia, which obviously I survived thanks to a mensch of an anesthesia guardian angel, Dr. Michael Kessler, who literally talked to me like every day for 3 weeks before the surgery. All of a sudden, I'm driving. I'm not hired. I'm not using my driver anymore. I'm driving in the rain. I mean, I don't love it, but I'm doing it. And I realized that my whole life, I was afraid to drive because I was afraid if I was in an accident, I was going to have general anesthesia. And I mean, nobody saw that or figured that out because I don't get anxious driving. I mean, I'm sure there could be a situation where I could, another accident, but it's like, I'm driving now. And it's like, who knew that, and that's why when you say avoidance makes it worse, with general anesthesia, it wasn't like I could just say, hello, I'm afraid of anesthesia.
I want to do exposure therapy every day with it.
But it's mind blowing how, like, when you have fears that because I think of people I know in my life, and I'm not going to say their names, they're younger than me, and I see how much they suffer with some of the same things I do, whether it's driving or spiders, because I'm afraid of certain kind of scary dogs and stuff. But it's like, the cost of not facing your fears, you think it's keeping you safe. It's actually, I think the fear is worse than the doing. And I'm in a situation, it's kind of like, it's almost like God is just saying, okay, come on, AJ, now let's give you more. You could handle this. Right? Just when I thought it was safe to go back in the water, I developed this that I'm dealing with now, this dental emergency that I actually have right now. And I'm thinking, well, now I just, give me a little break. So I'm going to have some major dental stuff done. And it's like, and then hopefully I'm done. I'm going to have to get like a tooth pulled and a graft, and it's going to hurt. And I'm probably going to have to take pain medicine. That's the other thing. Like I was so afraid that I avoided all medicines, like even ones I needed. Like I needed to take thyroid medicine. And I was so afraid because of these experiences that it got to the point where I didn't take I was hypothyroid since I was 50. And eventually I grew a white beard like Santa Claus because of not treating it. So finally, for vanity, I'm like, I can't have a beard, But the thing is, I really feel for people who suffer with any of the things I'm talking about, whether it's any kind of addiction, whether it's any kind of trauma. I want them to know that there's help. But the problem is, it took me 2 years to find you, and I don't know how to tell people how to find not just a trauma therapist, but a good trauma therapist.
And to summarize a lot of what you're sharing, like trauma is a big underlying root to the addictions. You started facing the addictions, right? So stopping the avoidance in that regard. And then other things like grief, you were intentional about seeking treatment and retreats and other things to help with the grief. And then medical trauma, right? These different fears or challenges rooted in trauma, but realizing in order for me to grow and heal, I need to face these things. And that takes a lot of strength.
Absolutely. And I think without the lung cancer diagnosis, I would probably have never had the opportunity, but it got to the point where the tumor had more than doubled. And it was like, I guess I got to do something about it. And so it's just so hard, to do it. And especially and I think one of the hardest things, and I'd love for you to address this if you don't have time now on my podcast, is that you're in the mental health space. So you're compassionate to this. And even though Dr. Nedley is not a mental health professional, he's compassionate to this as a primary practitioner. But like when you go to the ER, it's so hard in others, like, because they're not, just like doctors aren't trained about nutrition, they're not really trained to have necessarily compassion for mental health. Dentists kind of are, because a lot of people,
yes.
I'm not the only one afraid of the dentist. That I know. They're used to people not liking them. But it's really hard, especially if you present as a 65-year-old woman and like say, look, I'm just too scared to do this. And to, because one of the things is, I'm not just resilient. Apparently I'm stoic, because before this general anesthesia experience, I needed to have some things done just diagnostically. And I had to like fight to have them done without sedation, because doctors do not like you awake. Dr. Nedley didn't care. Dr. Nedley, he did my endoscopy and my colonoscopy without sedation. He's like, yeah, that's fine. Very difficult. The colonoscopy, not a problem without sedation. Endoscopy, very, very hard. Don't recommend it. But the epidural and the, what was the other one? The lung biopsy. There was a fifth procedure I had to. Now I would probably consider it. I don't know. I mean, I still like I feel like when you're awake, you have more control, but
a big part of anxiety. Yeah.
Right. But see, the problem is for lung surgery, you can't be awake. I mean, you can in Milan and believe me, Beijing and Milan. I looked it up. There's 2 countries that will do it awake, but not in the United States, because they really want you have to be able to stop breathing for them to be able to do what they're doing. But I am so much less afraid. And even, I know that when I have this dental procedure, it could hurt and I could need pain medicine, and I'm not adverse to like taking a baby dose of, like, if it's prescribed, like the tiniest dose, because yeah.
So far you've overcome so many fears, so many difficulties.
Yeah.
You've been successful through it all, and yet still healing.
Yeah, still healing. It's a work in progress. So yeah, but gosh, I wish it was easier.
And, AJ, we could spend probably hours talking about your story. It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And whenever I work with clients with trauma, I always try to take time to just tell them, like, it's quite amazing. And especially when you don't know the story, you just see the person in front of you, right? People look at you on your channel and maybe at first glance, wow, she's successful. She's this, she has a great personality. She's a comedian, all these great things. And what I've appreciated again is you being transparent about those struggles in a way that we understand everybody struggles, everybody experiences difficulties, but what do we do with it? How do we respond to it? And your story really is remarkable in the face of so many difficulties. Like you were saying, like, just slow down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate that, because I'm not just like this perfect Instagrammer, with, retouched everything. And I mean, I have been very real and open with people. And I think they appreciate that, because it gives them permission to maybe not hide, because there's so many people, even in the plant-based world right now with cancer, that are afraid to come out because it will hurt their brand. And I think it'll probably help your brand, actually, because people will be able to resonate with the real you instead of the you that you're portraying on social media.
Yeah. And this will probably be like a part 2 in the sense of, now I'll be on your podcast, so we can encourage people to listen to that too. But just to wrap things up, for those who are listening who may have struggled with the different things we've talked about, food addiction, eating disorders, like even things we just briefly mentioned, trauma, medical trauma, fears, phobias, anything that you want to share in closing.
Well, get to the root.
Get to the root.
Get to the root. And I didn't know that, because a lot of people said, oh, trauma doesn't matter. It doesn't affect your life. And but apparently it does. And get to the root,
So getting to the root, trauma, and then I also heard you just make practical decisions, like eating better. I know exercise has
Oh my
been
God.
a big...
I got to just say,
I knew you wanted to talk about that.
No, because it's like, here's the thing, a lot of people, when I do my show and I have the doctors on, they'll say, well, I have this mental illness or whatever, and they'll say, well, will that help? And they'll say, well, it's not going to hurt, but we can't promise, like, if you have bipolar or schizophrenia, eating this way will help. But I can promise you one thing, and I resisted this for 52 years, especially if you're anxious and depressed, exercise is stronger and better than any antidepressant. I'm telling you that because I was on those drugs. They made me a zombie. I had no personality. I'm not telling you that, that you shouldn't take them if you need them or want them. For me, they were horrible. I had no personality. And my friend, who is a psychologist, said, well, just think of it as your antidepressant.
Yes.
But it's free and there's no side effects other than you'll feel better. And I went from a lifetime of never exercising other than jumping to conclusions and, maybe some light dog walking, to doing a vigorous hour every day of spinning, even through my cancer, even through 66 days of pain of pancreatitis, because I've got to do first thing in the morning though, because unfortunately every morning you gotta, do it again. But to me, that is the best treatment for anxiety and depression. And it's, I think, so underutilized. And, can't just be, taking a stroll is good, but you gotta sweat. You gotta get that heart rate up. And, especially if you're angry at all, or it's, I don't like it. I still do it. I don't like it. I don't like it at all, but I like the effect of doing it. And I wish I had learned this sooner, because it could have helped me a lot.
I was just thinking, as you were sharing, your story really summarizes so much of what we talk about on the podcast, right? Nutrition, exercise, trauma, and so forth.
And we didn't get to faith. And even though I'm a different faith than you, I really do believe in God. I don't talk about that a lot because, people like, atheists don't like it when you do, but I do. I might have a different definition or relationship, but I believe faith is very important of whatever it is you believe in, because without that, that old saying, what do you call an atheist in a coffin? Somebody all dressed up with no place to go. So I do believe in God, and I pray a lot in my own way. And I love that people pray for me, and any religion, so I think faith is really important. Because I'll tell you one thing, chaplains. Yeah, people don't know about these a lot. And I did not know until I got diagnosed with cancer. So there are these wonderful people. They can be every denomination or no denomination. And if you're scared, you could just go in a hospital, and if you're having a test, even if you're having a CAT scan, doesn't have to be major surgery. And these warm people, 24 hours a day, they'll come and hold your hand. They are like angels. I need to get one on the podcast. And like right before my surgery, she came, she prayed with me. And then apparently the rabbi came after I wasn't even awake, but there's resources out there, and they can be not completely non-denominational, or if you say you like God, but their comfort. I'm like, God, they're like, I love these people. I wish I could just have one all the time. Whenever I go to the ER, it's like, first call, get me a chaplain. They're just so, yeah.
Yeah.
I love
nutrition, exercise, connection, getting to the root.
Yeah.
And going back to what we started with, kind of full circle, if you look at the recipe that you were given, right, the ingredients, I should say, of what you were given, trauma, hardships, and still some of those things are still present, including cancer and other things in your journey. You have been able to rewrite that recipe, right? And make a beautiful life that is really giving so many other people a purpose and a meaning to their lives. And I've been blessed. And so I'm just so grateful that we could just have a snippet today of your story.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you're going to continue to bless so many people through your channel and just through your life.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening to another episode on the Brain People podcast, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need encouragement and practical mental health support. To hear more episodes, discover additional resources, and stay connected with us, follow @The Brain People Podcast on social media.